Alright, let's see, then give me this, yeah, that's the crate, alright, that's great. Right, where's the crate? Give me the crate, open with the key, do you want to? Yes, I'm sure, and let's see. That's not unusual, that's just paint. That's just... Before I begin this video, I think it's important to note that all of this is just my opinion. The statements I make in this video are not objective truth, they're just personal preferences. If you disagree with me, that's perfectly fine and I totally respect that. So, please also respect my views. No matter what your opinion is, however, I would like to ask you to at least listen and not immediately downvote the video just based on the title. I don't like unusuals, I never did. When I first started playing TF2, I thought they were kinda neat, just not my cup of tea. But over the years, I've thought more and more about them and I actually developed an aversion against them. I don't hate them, I just really don't like them. That's why I made this video, because I really don't think they're as great as many people make them out to be. It's fine if you do like them, but I also think they have a couple of issues that I'm going to point out now. Let me begin. One of my biggest problems with unusual effects is how their designs are incredibly lazy. All they really are just particle effects. You know, these things that appear when you shoot a rocket or use your flamethrower. Especially the earliest unusuals seem to just use already existing particle effects ripped straight from the game. Oh look, this one is a flame that orbits around your head. This one is just confetti. This one is just smoke. How absolutely riveting. Now, you may be saying that I'm nitpicking because I only mentioned the earliest effects when they were still experimenting. And while it is true that later effects got much more complex, there's still a ton of them that are just very boring. For example, this one is really just a glowing green cloud with a bat. This one is some sort of purple candle flame. Here's an effect that's literally just electrostatic. And the worst offender in my opinion is this one. It's pixels. It's literally just colored squares flying around your head. You think that took effort to make? I could do the same in MS Paint in a few minutes. In fact, I'm gonna do it right now. Now, they're not all awful. There's some that actually have a lot of thought and effort put into them. I personally think that Bonzo the All-Gnawing is very interesting, and I do think the effect that turns from a moon into a skull is a very simple yet effective idea. Even crazier ones like Knife Storm or Molten Mallard also work very well. But then you still have 3 more electricity ones just in slightly different colors. I'm really not trying to hate on the creators of these effects here. I'm sure they did put a lot of effort into them, yet at the same time there's also a ton that are just so boring. Don't get me wrong, the rest of them are pretty alright, very interesting and even nice looking. If they existed in any other medium, like as spells or magic effects in a fantasy RPG, they work very well. But as effects for heads in an FPS game? Not really. I think the effects themselves don't work at all in TF2. As I've said earlier, it's really just the act of taking a particle effect and making that float around your head. That would be like if there were weapon skins that just use existing map textures on them instead of original ones. I mean, what's stopping me from taking a sprite from a totally different game, slapping that on the head and calling it an unusual effect? Oh wait. Unusuals are, simply put, out of place. They do not fit in the game even compared to all the crazy things that are in it, like rocket jumping or talking swords. At least hats make sense. The potassium bonnet is incredibly silly and I really dislike it, but at least it's a hat. All of the hats in the game are still things that could realistically exist in real life. Suspension of disbelief allows me to believe that in the world of TF2, Manco sells these stupid hats to mercenaries because they're dumb enough to actually buy them. I can get behind that. When I see a guy running around with the Fearmonger or the Hot Dogger or even the ugliest one of them all, the Mountebank's mask, I can still believe that they actually bought that from a real store. Even the beards could either be real or just fake beards that the mercenaries just glued on their faces. But then I see playing cards floating around one guy's head or a thunderstorm cloud above another guy's, and I get taken out of the experience. There's no way that these things could ever exist. They aren't even explained anywhere in the lore, they make zero sense. Even Death by Disco, the effect I made fun of earlier, but which is still the only effect I actually like, is guilty of this. Why on earth would pixelated skeletons dance on someone's head? Well, one could easily say it's because of magic. Erasmus and the Horseless Headless Horseman exist in the game after all, and there's things like spells and even special particle effects for your weapons and even feet. But those are only around during Halloween, not throughout the entire year. And even if saying that it's magic is one of the laziest excuses ever. because you don't need to justify magic. It's magic. It makes no sense but can do anything. Is there a plot hole in the story? It's magic. There's no way this could possibly ever work? Yes, it can, with magic. Magic, now with 20% less effort. Plus, there's a ton of effects like the electricity, the freaking pixels or the galactic codex that are very unlikely to be made from magic. Even saying a wizard did it has its limits. I know not everything in the game needs to make sense, but when it's this arbitrary, then it's just distracting. Plus, from a design perspective, that's very lazy that it's not even explained anywhere. All of these issues really add up and create a much larger one. And this brings me to my last topic. I have already talked about how unusuals are lazily designed, out of place and pretty unrealistic. And because of this, I think they're almost as bad, if not worse, than certain hats when it comes to ruining the art style. As I've said, at least hats make sense. A hat, as silly as it is still a hat. They do still mostly fit the personalities of the characters that they're there for. But there are a ton of hats that definitely don't work well with the mercenary that can equip it, like the majority of all class hats. Because of this, I can say that unusuals are worse than hats, but they're still pretty bad. I mean, what does this effect say about the mercenary that wears it? How does this one relate to the sniper, or this one to the medic? The flame ones obviously fit very well on pyro, maybe even soldier. Electricity could work well on engineer and to an extent even on medic. But whose personality screams for ball of plasma? Does a spy's outfit really work well with hovering colored squares? It's not like there's unusual effects like floating rockets or dripping Gerardi that are exclusive to a certain class. No, any class can have any effect. That's probably also why the earlier ones were so incredibly simplistic and vague, because they wouldn't not fit anyone exclusively. The peace sign, for example, doesn't work on spy any less than it does on sniper. But because they're there for every class, there's some unusuals that are pretty expensive because they actually fit the hat that they're on. These are called themed unusuals. I find it very silly that this is praised for being a rarity, whereas it should be the norm. But instead, they're all just pink and purple and green particles floating around your head. People complain about scouts wearing lime green cosmetics, but I've never seen anyone complain about a scout having a lime ghost orbit around his head. Yes, the former is much more obtrusive, but the latter isn't much better. But that isn't to say that unusuals are completely awful. Unusuals do have a couple of upsides. For starters, they make it very obvious that the player that's wearing them knows what they're doing. Hats already do the same, but because unusuals are so much more rare, it's more likely that the person that puts the time into acquiring the effect also put a lot of time into playing the game. Someone who just started playing the game likely isn't gonna care about unboxing is what I'm saying. Also, as I've said earlier, when the effect and the hat actually do match, it can look very nice. The Swagsman swatter, for example, would work incredibly well with the masked flies effect. Because the corks on the brim of the hat are actually there to keep the flies away from the face. That's what the hat was made for. Plus, flies are actually a thing that exists and does make sense, unlike floating fireballs. My problem is just that the majority of effects really don't make any sense or even fit. But when they do, it can add a whole new level to hats. And, of course, they're the biggest, if not the only reason why people even still unlock crates. So, in a way, they're also a reason for why the game is even still being worked on. Because it makes Valve money. At the same time, however, that really doesn't excuse their designs. Throughout the entire video, I haven't even mentioned unusual effects for weapons and taunts. I gotta admit, I really don't mind the taunt ones that much, because they're not on the body 24/7, meaning they're only bright and flashy for a brief moment. The ones on the weapons look like garbage though. I'm not sure if they're better or worse than Killstreak shines. I think worse because at least the shines don't appear all the time. Now, I mean no offense to the creators of these effects. As I said, I'm sure they put a lot of time and effort into them, I just really don't think that the majority of them are very good. Also, if you do like unusual effects, that's perfectly fine and I'm happy that you do enjoy them. You're free to like whatever you want and there's really no harm in that. However, just because you or I like something, that doesn't automatically mean it's good. For example, I quite like the totally not Undertale effect, even though it's an effect that fits the least in the game. It's just a guilty pleasure of mine. Well, those have been my thoughts. I think unusuals are lazy, out of place and ruin the art style. If they were more common, they would be an even bigger issue in my eyes. But thankfully, they're incredibly rare. Though if they weren't, then I'm sure a ton of people wouldn't care for them either, perhaps even for the same reasons I listed here. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Well, probably. Either way, write your comments down below. Tell me how wrong I am and how I'm just salty because I never unboxed an unusual in my life. Also, please do post criticism as I can use that to improve my future videos. Anyway, have a fantastic day and goodbye.